Okay, we're recording.
All right, welcome. Welcome everybody. Welcome, Rebecca. Are you there? I don't see you. Can you say something, Rebecca? So you show up on the screen, you might need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Hello.
There you are. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining us in this fun and unusual setting. I'm sure you remember, but I'll just remind you, you'll have about 2.5 minutes for your answers. And with about 30 seconds remaining, one of us will just say 30 seconds and you can just keep talking, okay? All right,
Great.
so we are going to begin with our final candidate. Okay, Rebecca. In case everybody didn't know either, this is Rebecca Stair, also known apparently as Rebecca Puck, but we're going to call her Rebecca tonight. Okay, this pandemic, in combination with other global crises, lack of clean water, climate-related disasters, mass migrations, trade and supply disruptions, the economic impact of plummeting oil prices, has shown us how ill-prepared and inadequate our existing institutions and systems are in addressing our current and future challenges. So here come our questions. Question 1. Most stark are the fragility of our social structure and the instability of our economic security, especially for the most vulnerable, the most financially insecure, the unprotected but essential workers, the unsheltered, and the disabled. How do you see our state government addressing these current needs in a systemic way to mitigate the impact and better prepare for future crises?
That is a great question. Whoever worded that, as an English teacher, I thank you. Great. So I'll start with the short term and then go medium and long. So as you know, our state's entire undergirding fiscal scaffold, including our Constitution, is over a century old. It's an old structure and hasn't been upgraded. And as you said, with our crashing oil market, our stagnant economy, and the neglected foundations that COVID has revealed, it's time to re-examine our entire monetary system and here in the state and craft a more stable and more resilient and more equitable fiscal structure. As someone who's managed budgets in New Mexico and beyond for 15 years, thousands of contracts, thousands of deliveries on time and on budget, I know that basically there's 3 buckets of action that you can help with the finances. There's addressing what's coming in, there's addressing what's going out, and then there's the how of what you're spending. So I'll walk through them real quick. So in terms of the in here in New Mexico, we need to increase and diversify our revenues. And there's no easy answer to this, but as you know, I come from the film industry and we can temporarily support other low-hanging economic sectors, just like we've supported film and have many, many economic sectors vibrant in this state. That includes solar and wind, not just electrifying New Mexico itself, but also designing, manufacturing, and recycling solar panels and turbines for this state and other states. Space and aviation, because here in New Mexico, the first mile is free. Outdoor recreation, I think we could match or exceed what's going on in Colorado because we also have cultural diversity here. And things like regenerative agriculture, bringing us into the post-carbon. So that's the in. We could also diversify our incoming revenue by adding things like internet sales tax and car excise fees that won't cost anything to New Mexicans. Then with the out, as you know, we're facing a huge budget shortfall. It could be up to $2 billion. And that's where we're going to have to make some really hard choices in the special session in June or July, whatever it's called. When it comes to making hard decisions, and I've had
30 seconds.
As a budget manager, you have to protect the foundations. And in New Mexico, that means people. So that's protecting healthcare, infrastructure, education, environment, and that includes green energy and water and public safety. Then if you have anything left, you invest in the infrastructure for the future, not the 20th century, but the 21st century. And then the how, we need to stretch our existing dollars further by clarity in discretional capital outlay, reforming the GRT. Last thing I'll say is there's a really good time and place to think about a state bank for New Mexico to capture our money here and circulate it here.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up real quick on that, just for anybody who doesn't know, and explain, because you said it with a smile. What do you mean by here in New Mexico, the first mile is free?
Oh, well, when you're in space, you're going that way, and we're already at a mile up. So we compete functionally with California and Colorado. In some places, Colorado also has the first mile free, but also Cape Canaveral in Florida, like they're coming from sea level, which is also the thicker air. So it's more fuel and therefore more expensive, bigger aircraft, all kinds of complications. And here, of the 6 miles you got to go to get to outer space, the first mile is free.
I bet you just taught people something they never knew before.
I'm probably the only candidate who's landed at the spaceport twice.
Oh, that's cool. All
Yeah.
right, question number 2. Our state budget is being severely and negatively impacted right now. As you know, you got it in that last question.
Yeah.
What measures, specific measures, would you take to specifically address budget shortfalls? And what do you propose doing to strengthen and diversify our economy in order to meet our community's socioeconomic and infrastructure needs? Now, you mentioned a lot of things in that last answer. So if you want to go into those a little deeper, or if you have something else to add, that's okay too.
Yeah, I'll do both. So I mentioned, for example, reforming GRT, gross receipts tax, to help our small businesses compete. I don't know if your folks know, your audience may know, but for example, out-of-state corporations pay less tax than our local small businesses, for example. So that's a fix that a senator can and should immediately make. I talked very briefly about a state bank. That's a kind of a new concept, but in America at least. But all the banks that we usually deal with are for profit, and they take our money so that they can make money. And that's fine and good, but there's, just like we have for-profit TV and maybe non-profit TV in the form of PBS, there's a role in our ecosystem, our economic ecosystem niche for a state bank, which is nonprofit and whose goal is not to maximize profit, but to maximize public good. And state bank, for example, in North Carolina is used for all the things we need right now: investment in healthcare, education, schools, small business, or not businesses, but nonprofits, anything whose goal is not to make money. And so I think now we've been talking about it for a long time in New Mexico, and now is a really good time to talk about it. It could also be a place for us to bring home some of our land-grant permanent fund money, which is now housed in banks in basically North Carolina, where the interest that's made goes to people outside of the state, partially. And we could talk about bringing some of that money home and investing it here, and that way we get both the investments. You can spend the money on maybe building a highway, and then the interest of it is owned by the New Mexicans here, and then we earn the interest and it doesn't go to North Carolina. The last thing I'll say is, one specific example is we need to, in our tax structure, flip what we've been doing and really think about taxing the destructive and incentivizing the healthful. Because in the long run, you're going to come out ahead financially. When you have destructive things, you have to pay cleanup costs. You have to pay healthcare costs for asthma from an oil well, right? And one idea for that is, right now in New Mexico, and everywhere, we have a category of business called nonprofit, right? If you do a service to the community, we acknowledge that good that you do to the community by calling you a nonprofit and giving you a tax break. I want to create a second parallel category called non-carbon, where if you can do business in New Mexico, any kind of business, and do it by emitting net low or no carbon, we acknowledge the good that you're doing to the community, call you a non-carbon, and give you a similar kind of tax break.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you for the specifics. All right, moving on. Number 3. What are your specific ideas for New Mexico making the transition to a more resilient and inclusive clean economy? And again, you kind of just answered that a little bit. If you want to go into more detail, it's a good question. So your ideas for making the transition to a more resilient, inclusive, clean economy. Will we be able to stick with this plan? And what do you think will be the timeline for this plan, given our New Mexico economy following COVID-19?
I'm going to pull from a couple different areas on this one. So, because you can't answer this question without addressing COVID. And the hardest part of where we all are right now, and where particularly senators and candidates are right now, is the hardest part of all of this is acknowledging the suffering and the fear and the pain and the death that we're in right now. We're in the bottom of a very dark place. and we're going to have to climb ourselves out. There isn't really help coming from anywhere. So as senator, I would first work fiercely to stop the bleeding, literally stop the damage, stop the suffering, and ensure that people have enough to eat and have jobs, and that our businesses, or small businesses, can reopen by some of those tax measures I mentioned earlier. Then, to honor this suffering, I want to make sure we learn something from this and we don't just go exactly back to how things were before, because that makes us vulnerable to a repeat. But I want to make changes so we never have to do this again. And there is a silver lining here in that all our structures have become unraveled. And so in a way, we have a lot of freedom right now. So healthcare is unraveling, government is unraveling, economy is unraveling. But whether this pain that we're in is the pain of the tomb or the pain of the womb is really up to us. And we need a huge paradigm shift. And we can do it here in New Mexico. There's this unprecedented opportunity to rebuild all of these structures in a totally different way. And the timeline for that is basically how fast will it take us to accumulate the political will? How fast will it take us to elect the right senators in that line? I can talk, how much time do I have left?
You have about 45 seconds.
Okay, so I'll start. So to do this, there's 3 phases that we need to do simultaneously, and I'll start with R. There's rescue, recovery, and reimagine, okay? Rescue is the immediate need right now. We have to freeze, in some ways, freeze rents, make sure everybody has healthcare, support our small businesses, get our testing up in line. Recovery also needs to happen kind of at the same time, and that's a focus on recovering workers, not corporations. There could be job training, it could be student debt cancellation. And then while that's going on, we also have this opportunity to reimagine, to rebuild. And here's where I would copy principles of nature that has helped life survive adversity: diversity, decentralization, and duplication. And I'll finish this answer when I have more time.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to actually let you have about another 15 seconds because we don't have a follow-up on that. So go ahead and go.
Great. Okay, so the guiding principle with rescue, recovery, and reimagine is to invest in people, not corporations, because the true generators of wealth are people. They generate jobs and economic vitality. So what does that mean specifically? Imagine universal healthcare. Imagine paid sick leave. Imagine a living wage for the people who are keeping us living right now. Imagine rewarding businesses for shorter supply chains. Imagine that we bring manufacturing home here to New Mexico, but not big dirty plants like are in China, but smaller, more like maker shops with 3D printers and crowdsourced downloadable designs. I can keep going if you'll let me.
That's okay. We're going to go ahead and stop right there. I'm going to
Right.
follow up on that though in a second. We're going to go to question 4, and then when we have time, we'll come back if we don't have any other follow-ups. Okay. Question 4. Our state law criminalizing abortion predates Roe v. Wade and would be in effect if Roe v. Wade is overturned. What specific measures will you take to provide accessible, affordable, and safe abortion and reproductive health care for women in New Mexico?
Great question. I'm really glad you asked this one. So obviously there's 2 main things that I would do immediately. Is 1, I would vote to repeal that law, that dormant law that's on the books that still outlaws abortion in New Mexico. And in fact, the seat that I'm running for is one of the 4 seats that we need in the Senate. That's it, 4 votes in the Senate that we need to repeal that law. It's the importance of this seat that I'm running for. Second, that if that law is off the books, it still doesn't mean anything unless all women have access to quality, affordable, accessible healthcare in New Mexico. How do you do that? I've looked at a lot of different models. I've looked at all different ways of healthcare, Medicare for some, Medicare for all who can afford it. And basically it comes down to universal coverage. And I support, in theory, the New Mexico Health Security Act. It's under fiscal review right now, which should be due in June or so, and basically would cover all New Mexicans right off the bat from even before they're born. And would probably, if the fiscal analysis is correct, save what you and I pay in healthcare. We would save us $4 billion right off the bat. So that's going back to the budget. That's when I was talking about the how. There's a lot of money in New Mexico that's not being spent in the right ways. And if we really go through and tighten things, we'll discover that we have a lot more dollars than we think we do. So I'm waiting for the fiscal analysis on the New Mexico Health Security Act, and if it looks good when it comes out in June or July, then I'll continue to support that act.
Okay, cool. Excellent. All right, we do have a follow-up on this. How would, and this is from Mary Cunane, how would a state facing a budget shortfall manage to pay for the New Mexico Health Securities Act?
Well, the Healthcare Security Act is cheaper than what we have now because it effectively just takes out. That's the short answer. It effectively removes the profit-making middleman from the whole situation, and that's the insurance companies. That's the reason it hasn't passed, because the insurance companies don't like it, because it removes the profit motive from healthcare. And so therefore, shock, all of a sudden, my body is no longer available for someone to make profit off of it. So it's more affordable than our current situation.
Okay, we have another follow-up I'm going to go ahead and throw out to you, and this one's from Wendy Parker Wood. Given the likelihood that many small businesses will not survive this pandemic, you've already said that, we've already seen it happening every day, how do you see owners and their employees re-entering the workforce, and what can be done to redirect their experience and transferable skills?
Yeah, so I'll pick up where I had to drop off in my 3 phases of rescue, recovery, and reimagine. So I laid out some of it, which is universal. Again, you got to invest in the foundations. You got to invest in people, good healthcare, good education, and then ideas and jobs come from people. That's where they come from. So I talked about imagining bringing the manufacturing home, having maker shops here. We could reward businesses for permitting work from home, which is easier on some families. It's less driving, less time commuting, a lower carbon footprint. We could imagine rewarding businesses for abandoning some office buildings altogether and then repurpose those buildings for public needs like schools and hospitals and childcare. For example, imagine that before a business declares bankruptcy, the workers in it, maybe the waitresses and the bartenders, have the option to organize and together purchase that business as a co-op. And co-ops are proven to pay better, circulate money locally, be more creative, be more resilient, and strengthen communities. We could imagine a New Mexico Green New Deal where right now, all the workers sitting at home could get training, especially the workers in our diagonal corners who are basically out of the oil and gas industry. Imagine that right now we could be retraining them in renewable energies, installing design, manufacturing. Imagine that we switch how we do the internet and regulate it like a public utility so it becomes available to all those children who are struggling to study right now in their cars parked outside of schools.
30 seconds.
And imagine, like I said earlier, that we create a New Mexico state bank that keeps our dollars here instead of leaving the state. We are functionally an extractive state. And in doing this, we have a secret weapon here in New Mexico, or secret gift, which is we have this incredible diversity. And I would want to seek out all voices in doing this. I've found in my work across the state that those closest to the problem are often also closest to the solution. So I would want to, as my role as senator, seek out Native and Indigenous leaders, rural wisdom, input from all of our diverse communities, ask these questions, and then listen. And then center those voices in leadership roles in those communities. They know what to do. They just need to be empowered.
Okay, we have one last follow-up because we have time for it, but I'm only going to give you a minute for it. And this is also from Wendy Parker Wood. And she would like for you to call Joe Biden and give him one suggestion. What would that one suggestion be?
That's a great question. I would say collaborate. This is a big answer, but sometimes democracy gets a little too big and it doesn't work. And at the national scale, we might be witnessing a breakdown of the scale of democracy. And the only way to rescue that, and we have such diversity in the US, is for him to reach out and form a coalition. And the only way you do that is by listening. So reach out to all the governors, reach out to communities that aren't usually voting, reach out to people that aren't thought of as active politically, and not just try to extract money from them or extract votes, but actually say, it's a question that comes from love, actually.
10 seconds.
What do you What is life like for you right now? And what can I do for you? That's what I would recommend he do.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. You have about 1 minute for a closing statement. Before you start, I would just like to thank you very much for joining us in this unique and interesting time and our new format. Thank you for helping it go well and for being our closer tonight. And you have 1 minute for a closing statement. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me and for persevering. I heard today from our state auditor, Brian Colon, that the way you spell COVID is P-I-V-O-T. So I have 15 years experience working in New Mexico, in our communities, in every county and every economic sector. I basically know our state by name. And I've collaborated on thousands of win-win negotiations coming in on time and on budget and leaving everyone with a smile, generally, most of the time. And I've done all these things in a male-dominated industry, the film industry, which is just, as you know, oozing with sexual harassment and misogyny. Remember that the Me Too movement originated in the film industry. So if I can handle that, and if I can do all those things in that environment while battling discrimination and harassment, I can handle most tough things. I do want to say that I'm the only person in the race who actually works for a living. I work all day and then I jump in my car before COVID. I jump in my car to campaign events. I eat my dinner of cashews from a bag while I'm driving.
10 seconds.
And then in the parking lot, I change into my senator costume, speak, and then go home to deal with family and budget and mortgage. To make the transitions that we need to make here in the state, we need fresh thinkers. We need leaders from traditionally underrepresented communities to take us not back to normal, but forward to better.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you. Thank you, everyone who joined us. We so appreciate you taking your time and spending time with us this evening and seeing how our great experiment went. We appreciate it. Any feedback you'd like to give us, you can do so on Slack or through one of the emails on Nasty